In almost every one of his lectures, Gurdjieff reverted to a theme which he evidently considered to be of the utmost importance, but which was very difficult for many of us to assimilate. This is Ouspensky commenting in Chapter 4 of In Search of the Miraculous. There are, Gurdjieff said, two lines along which man's development proceeds, the line of knowledge and the line of being. In right evolution, the line of knowledge and the line of being develop simultaneously, parallel to and helping one another. But if the line of knowledge gets too far ahead of the line of being, or if the line of being gets ahead of the line of knowledge, man's development goes wrong, and sooner or later it must come to a stop. People understand what quote-unquote knowledge means, and they understand the possibility of different levels of knowledge. They understand that knowledge may be lesser or greater, that is to say, of one quality or of another quality. But they do not understand this in relation to quote-unquote being. Being, quote-unquote, for them means simply existence, as opposed to just non-existence. They do not understand that being or existence may be of different levels and categories. Take, for instance, the being of a mineral and the being of a plant. There are different levels of being. The being of a plant and of an animal, again, a plant and an animal is different levels of being. The being of an animal and of a man is a different being, different levels of being. But the being of two people, get this, the being of two people can differ from one another more than the difference between the being of a mineral and of an animal. It actually says that here. There could be such a difference in level of being between people. This is exactly what people do not understand. And they do not understand that knowledge depends on being. And not only do they not understand this, that knowledge depends on being, but they don't want to. They do not want to understand this. And especially in Western culture, here in America, in Europe, in Australia, in the Western world, it's considered that a man may possess great knowledge. For example, he may be a great scientist, an able scientist, make great discoveries, advance science, and at the same time he may be, and is considered to have the right to be, petty, egoistic, caviling, mean, envious, vain, naive, and self-flattering, full of self-conceit, self-complacent, and absent-minded. And yet it seems to be considered here that a professor must always forget his umbrella everywhere. And yet it is his being. And people think that his knowledge does not depend on his being. People think that knowledge does not depend on being. People of Western culture put great value on the level of a man's knowledge, but they do not value the level of a man's being, and are not ashamed of the low level of their own being. They do not even understand what it means. Don't even give it a second thought. This idea here of being, in contrast to knowledge. And they do not understand, he's saying it a second time here, that man's knowledge depends on the level of his being. If knowledge gets too far ahead of being, it becomes theoretical, abstract, inapplicable, no application to life, and actually is harmful. Because instead of serving life and helping people the better to struggle with the difficulties and problems they meet in life, it begins to complicate man's life, brings new difficulties into it, new troubles and calamities and problems that were not there before. The reason for this is that knowledge, which is not in accordance, it does not correspond with being, cannot be large enough for or sufficiently suited to man's real needs. It will always be a knowledge of one thing with the ignorance of another thing. Knowledge of the detail without a knowledge of the whole. A knowledge of the form without a knowledge of the essence. Such preponderance of knowledge over being is observed in present-day culture. The idea of the value and importance of the level of being is completely forgotten. And it is forgotten that the level of knowledge is determined by the level of being. Here is said the third time that knowledge is a function of being. The level of knowledge is determined by the level of being. Actually, at a given level of being, the possibilities of knowledge are limited and finite. Within the limits of a given being, the quality of knowledge cannot be changed. And the accumulation of information of one and the same nature, already within known limits, alone is possible. A change in the nature of knowledge is possible only with a change in the nature of being. Taken in itself, a man's being has many different sides. The most characteristic feature of a modern man is the absence of unity in him. And further, the absence in him of even traces of those properties which he most likes to ascribe to himself. A man ordinarily likes to think of himself as having, quote-unquote, lucid consciousness, which he doesn't have. But people think that they do. And people ascribe to themselves, man ascribes to himself, free will, which he doesn't have. A permanent ego or true self, real I, which he does not have. And the ability to do. It may surprise you if I say that the chief feature of a modern man's being, which explains everything, is sleep. It explains everything that is lacking in him, qualities which he imagines he has, such as true self, which he doesn't have. The chief feature of this is sleep. A modern man lives in sleep. He is born, and in sleep he dies.